Okay, welcome everyone. I'm going to call our meeting to order. Today is Wednesday, February 7th, 2024. This is the Assembly Legislative Committee with our usual monthly meeting. We are noticed from 1 to 2 p.m., but I don't anticipate we'll take the full hour. So that's either good or bad news, depending on how much you love this committee. So let's go ahead and do a call to order and introductions, and then we will move into our business. And we'll start on the phone with Mr. Johnson.
Here.
Okay, and then in the room,
Karen Bronga.
Anna Brawley. And are there any other members on the phone at this time? Okay, so it's just the three of us right now. And then we're also joined by Assembly Counsel, I see a Department of Law person in the back, and then Ms. Ross from Legislative Services and Ms. Costello from the Mayor's Office, and then our interpreter and Jasmine at the Clerk's Office. So we have a few things of business, and then I'll just note in general for this committee, the goal for these meetings during session is really to be informal and provide a place to bring up issues of concern or of interest. So just as I said before, if there's anything you guys want to talk about that is not on the agenda specifically, we have space for that under standing updates. So first we'll do unfinished business and, unfinished business. So the Alaska Municipal League, or AML, Winter Conference and Legislative Event, and I'll turn that over to Ms. Ross to just give a brief update of what's planned.
Yeah, we have a handful of members going. Ms. Brawley, Mr. Rivera, Mr. Soltz, and then Mr. Constant is going down for a day. And I hear, Mr. Johnson, you're coming as well? That's great. It's a really good...
Yeah, that's correct. Sorry.
Great. It's a really good conference, and they've got a really great schedule this day with a lot of elected officials. The congressional delegation is coming to speak. The governor is scheduled to speak, as well as the leadership of House and Senate. And then we're also working on scheduling visits with the assembly members with the leadership legislative members. So that's all going well.
Yeah, thank you. So for folks who are down in Juneau, if you happen to be listening, we will see you there in a couple weeks. And let's move on to new business. So under here, we have two items, and they're just general placeholder items. So giving highlights from the AML Legislative Weekly Updates, and then also potential action on active bills. And under both of those, I kind of see just giving information about what's happening in Juneau, what we understand, and then space again if there's potential action that we want to recommend to the full assembly or want to initiate. So I'll start, and then I'll see if others want to jump in. So in terms of AML updates, as one of our AML liaisons, I have joined their legislative committee, which is mostly a monitoring committee and information sharing. So they meet every every Friday, folks from different local governments as well as AML staff and their lobbyist, who happens to also be our lobbyist. So it's Wendy Chamberlain, and Heather Brakes really is the main contact there. So they give updates. Of course, they're speaking to all local governments, and so some things aren't necessarily relevant to us, the municipality, but it's helpful to stay involved there. And then generally also, this is not directly related to AML, but I do want to mention there's a copy of a resolution that we passed. It was, I guess, at our last meeting on the 23rd. So this is not for further discussion, but I just wanted to point to, it's essentially stating our broad policy position that we are a home rule municipality. It's not a position, it's just a fact, but also that we support local control, not just for us, but for other local governments. That's consistent with AML's position. And then on the back page, you'll see there's some, under section 1, just some general guidelines. And so I just want to point that to folks because, through AML, through other members, through individual members who may bring something up, we may get asked from time to time to take positions on things or consider them. And so this is not to preclude, consideration of that for any particular issue. But generally speaking, this resolution adopts some guidelines, the consistency with our legal status as a home rule municipality, protecting local control for us and other local governments, avoiding harmful impacts on residents and taxpayers. So obviously, if a bill is proposed that would negatively affect the municipality, that's an important thing to consider. And then something that AML has spoken about for a long time is preventing creation or expansion of unfunded mandates and dealing with kind of cost shifting of responsibility from state government to local government, because that's often a theme of, for better or worse, of bills that are proposed. So I just wanted to point that to folks because it's something that that we can utilize as a tool to come back to. Let's say somebody brings a bill for discussion to our committee next month. It doesn't mean that we can't take a position on it that's more specific to it, but just to say this is a kind of broad lens that we'll look at. So any other comments on that one? Okay. And I'll just check. I heard someone on the phone. Do we have an? Oh, okay. Thank you. Yeah. Then we're joined by Allie from Legislative Services. Okay. So then the next item in terms of kind of bleeding over from our AML updates and potential actions on active bills, I just wanted to give folks kind of a really brief rundown of what we're hearing. And then after that, I will turn to our legislative liaison from the mayor's office, Mia Costello, to give kind of a brief update of what you guys are also tracking. And then we can, I'll give kind of the short version of these, and then we can come back and talk about each topic. So these are just some of the things that I'm aware of that are happening down in Juneau, either through AML or having participated. So the first one is the Danyang Port of Alaska. So there's a couple of bills that we are aware of that would propose a port authority, which would include our port that we currently own. One of them is Senate Bill 155 that was introduced last year, has not had a hearing. The other one is House Bill 255, which is Representative McCabe's bill. That did have a hearing yesterday that I had an opportunity to listen to. So I would encourage folks to go back and listen. It's about a half hour if you would like to catch up. But essentially, what I heard, it was an introduction. There were a lot of good questions raised about, what this would mean, especially for the impacted municipalities. There was a lot of discussion about benefits to Port McKenzie, but there was definitely less kind of meat on the bone as far as how that would impact Anchorage. And then Representative Mina and Representative Stutes brought up a lot of good questions about those impacts to local government, whether it's the price, the asking price for the port, how that would affect local taxation. So that's just something we can come back to. I'm not proposing action at this time, but it's something that we should certainly monitor. Next one is transportation funding. And again, I'll run through these briefly, but just please let me know if you want to come back and we can take each of them up. Transportation funding, there was a Senate Transportation Committee hearing, I believe it was last Thursday, with an overview from DOT, state DOT. It was folks that we've seen in this room before, Sean Holland from Central Region and others. They gave an update. One thing of note was the presentation was on winter maintenance. They covered the November 2023 snow event in Anchorage, and there's a $1.17 million supplemental appropriation proposed in the supplemental budget for that. So one question I have as a follow-up is if it was 1.17 million total, and Anchorage is slated to receive, I think, 35,000. It seems like that maybe is low. So we can follow up offline, but I'll be curious from DOT staff how those measure up. But that's another one to watch because it gives a really thorough overview of DOT operations overall. And then I'll just run through a couple others. Education funding, of course, is a big issue. I know there's a lot of different opinions on that one. Since our last meeting, in the first week of session, there was a move to override the governor's partial veto of the base student allocation funding for this year. That veto override, they did take the vote and the vote failed. So they failed to override. And there's also been movement on Senate Bill 140, which originally I think had to do with it was a very specific bill about internet access, but also has included several other items, including a funding proposal. And so that one, there was a lot of action quickly, a lot of questions about local control, impact of creation of state charters outside of school districts. There's a lot of kind of issues there, but it seems like the movement has slowed on that. So that's also one we're monitoring. And then lastly, I'll mention the Senate passed the SB 88, Senate Bill 88 around defined benefits. So that has been another big topic, something that we have taken a position on. And so we'll see, because of course it has to go through the House as well. So lots of things happening. At this point, I'm not specifically recommending action on any of these things, but I wanted to bring it to the committee's attention. So there, I'll pause and see if there's any comment on those 4 items, and then we'll move on after that. Comments or questions? Mr. Johnson, too, I'll try to monitor my text, but feel free to speak up if you'd like to speak. Okay, not hearing any discussion on those at the moment, but again, we can bring up that topic or other topics as people would like. With that, I'll just turn to Ms. Costello to give an update on your visit to Juneau and other things that you guys are tracking.
Great, thank you so much. So as you know, I alerted the leadership of the assembly that the mayor did spend a day in Juneau, and he met with the Anchorage Caucus members, which was really productive for a lunch. He met with co-chairs of the Senate Finance Committee, either them or their staff, and the chair of the House Energy Committee. He also met with Representative Allard from Eagle River, and then Senator Keel had requested a meeting, so we met with him. And so the mayor shared his legislative priorities, which, there are multiple issues in the priorities booklet that was voted on, and so he spent his time talking about 3 directly from that. The first item was the port and an update on what's going on with the port. The second item the mayor talked about was Cook Inlet Energy. And then the third item he spoke about was the homeless situation. And so all of those conversations were really productive. And depending on the committee that the person sat on, usually their conversation would veer more towards the issue that was before their committee. So for example, with Senator Hoffman, we spoke mainly about the Port Authority legislation that's moving through that had the hearing yesterday in House Transportation. So I felt like overall it was productive. And if anyone has any further questions about that, be happy to answer questions about that. So yesterday, John Sims from NSTAR and the House Energy Committee mentioned that we'll be out of gas in 2025. So this morning, or actually yesterday, I think the House majority had a press conference about Cook Inlet gas and the energy situation there. Today at 3:30, the House and Senate Resource Committee is having a joint committee hearing, and it's all about Cook Inlet gas and NSTAR and Hillcorp and Fury and and Blue Crest. They're giving presentations to the legislature about that. So I'll be listening into that to hear, what is going on with that. There are 2 bills that the governor's introduced related to the energy tariffs on the electrical grid, and those bills in the House, they were referred to the House Finance Committee, and in the Senate, they were referred to Resources, Labor and Commerce, and Finance. So we're following that, and we feel that after our visit and also what's happening recently, that the legislature is really going to be focused on energy this session and trying to address the situation in Cook Inlet. And as you know, there's several bills to provide royalty relief. I think Representative Rauscher has a bill for new investment in Cook Inlet, and the governor has one for royalty relief on those companies. So we're hoping that something will come out of that this session. Otherwise, we're following what the Municipal League is doing, and know that they're very busy setting up committees, and I'm glad to hear that you're participating in the legislative committee that they have. So that's it.
Okay, questions from members for Ms. Costello? Go ahead, Mr. Gates, Ms. Branca.
Hi, thanks. Ms. Costello, I just wondered what you mentioned the port bill, and I guess there's a few. The port bill you talked about that went through some counties. The one where the state wants to take over the Port of Alaska.
Yes.
What are the next motion, I guess upcoming actions for that one.
Okay,
No.
so the House Transportation Committee yesterday had a hearing where they just introduced their version. Representative Kevin McCabe has a South Central Port Authority bill, which would combine the Don Young Port of Alaska and the Matsu Port. I believe it's really just an introductory hearing on the legislation, and we worked with Representative Mina and her staff to prepare some questions that came because the committee chair made the decision not to have public testimony or to have invited testimony. So a lot of good questions were asked, and I believe the port is putting together some more information to share with the committee so that they're a little more informed about the impacts that an authority would have at this point in the project. Our conversations on the Senate side indicate that the legislation is not ready really for prime time, that the time that it would take to get together a viable bill that addresses all of the concerns that we would have to address if we moved into a port authority model of governance. And so we're making ourselves available to any member who has questions, and we hope at some point to have an update that we could provide to the members because they're not doing this day to day like we are and may not be aware of the progress that's been made or the status of the project. So we're just, keeping ourselves available for questions. And if there is a chance for the public to or testifying, then we know that the port will be willing to provide those answers to questions that they have.
Go ahead, Member Branca.
So I know you said there were 3 priorities that he spoke on, but I was hoping that he's also making a strong support for school funding and defined benefits when he's interacting with our state representatives, state leaders.
So as I had mentioned, they're really in the meetings that he had, he did not bring those up. And I do believe that you are aware that when the mayor had the legislative lunch to review the draft, that he actually spoke. His comments about defined benefit were that he was not in favor, that he personally had experienced experience with that. And so that issue actually didn't come up when we were in Juneau. He was not asked. I do know that the bill, Senate Bill 88, did pass the Senate. Senator Hoffman and Senator Stedman voted against it, saying they couldn't vote for a bill that did not have a fiscal note. So the actuarial report that they're waiting for has not been completed yet. However, the bill is now over onto the House side, and it was referred to the House State Affairs Committee, and they have set up a subcommittee that will be looking at that bill. So that's where that is. But he wasn't actually asked about that. Our conversations were, essentially about energy with the Energy Committee chair and then the port. So, the time flies when you're in the meetings, but, I think that's why, it's great that the assembly will be going down and you'll be sharing, what's important to you too. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Oh, go ahead, Ms. Ross.
I can't remember if you went before or after the assembly and the mayor passed that resolution for the funding for the shelter. Did that come up at all, or any progress on that one?
Thank you. Yeah, so there were a lot of, we did get into discussions about the homeless situation and the specific ask for assistance from the legislature. And there is an interest in getting more information about the homeless situation in Anchorage and what's going on. And so I spoke with Alexis Johnson following our visit, and she's putting together a PowerPoint that we'll run, we'll share with you and then share with members of the Anchorage caucus who are really interested in getting more details about what's happening with homeless. There's definitely an interest in how Anchorage legislators can help the municipality with that issue. So I thought those discussions were productive too.
I'm going to follow up on that. Just maybe we can work offline about what you want us, the assembly, to present when they're down in Juneau in 2 weeks to be seamless with
Great.
that topic.
Yeah, thank you. And on that point too, just the meeting before this, actually, our public safety committee meeting, both police and fire really shared a lot of the impacts on not having somewhere to go. Some of that was related to cold weather, specifically in their roles in code, having to do with life and safety. But I think that's also really good data and maybe some good stories, because they were describing having to drive folks around for hours, and being frustrated, and obviously wanting to see people be safe, but not able to do anything else. And so I think that can help really illustrate the cost to our emergency services. So I would encourage those presentations to be helpful. Just a couple other notes too on the Port Authority. I was also in contact with Representative Mina, but I think, we can certainly be collaborative there. And I would say, I don't know as much about the port as Member Constant or Chair Constant, Vice Chair Zalatel, who I know is out of state. And then I did talk briefly with Mr. Johnson yesterday as the Enterprise and Utility Oversight Committee, because that's typically where port related discussions happen. So this committee, I'm not trying to poach other topics, right? But certainly if you need context or additional voices there, I think that they are going to be much more knowledgeable than I am. But yeah, I think we all agree that there's a lot of unanswered questions about the Port Authority. I think that was it for now. I guess I'll just mention too, I know it's difficult with our kind of public notice process and our agendas schedule. It is hard for us to be kind of extremely nimble in taking positions on things, or being official with resolutions. But that's certainly an option. Or if it's something in our legislative program, I think leadership would be able to sign letters and things like that. So we can work within the confines of our own process to make sure that we're being responsive. Go ahead, Ms. Bronca.
So, Ms. Costello, when you were in Juneau, or the mayor was in Juneau talking, I'm hearing all these rumors about the Northway Mall, and I cannot confirm that somehow the state is involved in it being used for shelter and that it's been purchased. But I have not, it doesn't go anywhere. It just, yeah, it is happening. But I wondered if you had heard anything about that.
So I have never been in a meeting where that was brought up, and I'm not aware of the status of the Northway Mall. If there is anything going on, I'm not aware of that. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Ms. Bronca. I have not heard that either, but we will keep an eye out, I guess. You're out. Okay. Is there any other kind of bill or topic that I missed that's in play for folks who are watching, just to see if there's anything else we need to address? Oh, go ahead, Ms. Ross.
I have a general question about process. We have a number of specific requests, and I'm not sure how we're going to make those. And maybe in these meetings we could talk about them and talk about strategy for some of them. Does that make sense? And it sounds like a lot of work, so I don't even know where to begin. But, for instance, in the housing and homelessness realm, we have a pretty solid plan for the $4 million operating for shelter, and we're working on that. But then the other one is $10 million capital request for housing Alaskans. And I don't know if anyone is working on that or bringing that to people in Juneau.
Yeah, that is a good question. I have not personally had that conversation, but I've also been traveling for part of this month. That would be a good question, I think, to follow up with Mr. Rivera, because I know he's been, he's our other AML liaison, but also he's been tracking that. But I think in general, I think that is a good question, because I know we've talked about, so we've got our legislative program, we've got individual resolutions, and then we've talked about where there might be utility in creating, one pagers or things that similar to what that you guys did with the mayor's office, just really highlighting in more detail. I think we haven't gotten that far yet, and I think it is tricky because these meetings are only monthly. So I think that's something, because by the time we'll meet again, it'll be March 6th, about halfway through session. So I think maybe that's something we talk about offline. But I think that is a good question and kind of how we want to approach that. And that's something I think we can also talk to the co-chairs of the Anchorage Caucus about, just as, getting some advice on what would be most effective. Because we certainly don't want to create paper that no one's going to look at, but. Okay. Oh, and one other thing just of interest in terms of upcoming hearings. I know Chair Constant could not be here today, but he mentioned, I think Thursday afternoon, the House Energy Committee is also, holding a hearing on the Eklutna River or the Eklutna Dam project. And so he had requested that our lobbyists just monitor that one. And that's all the information I have. But just for folks who are interested, that will be happening. Okay, why don't we move on then to our standing updates? And this is again, I'm going to think about how to rework this agenda because I realize it maybe seems duplicative of what we just discussed. But this set of updates is really for anybody, any of the members participating who would like to bring up specific items or other things they're tracking. And I will bring up one partly because Chair Constant can't be here today. He and myself are traveling to DC in March for the National League of Cities conference, which will also include visits to Capitol Hill with our congressional delegation and other cities equivalents. And so he has started working on setting up meetings with HUD officials to follow up on the request about HUD funding as well. So I don't have more detail about that, but just to say that's something we're tracking. Excuse me. And he is taking the lead on that one. And then if there's other things that we'll have another committee meeting before that trip. So if there's other things that we need to bring up, we can. Go ahead, Ms. Branca.
So on that, Green, I had a call and I haven't done any research on it yet, but there's a HUD program called NAHADSA. It's Native American housing. And I was told by the woman that this tribal housing stipend is ending at the end of this 2024. And she, noticed, she said, you're giving lip service to finding housing and then you're taking away this rug from under us and we're going to be in trouble. So when you're talking with HUD, I'll try to get some information on this NAHADSA.
Yeah, thank you. That would be great. And I know generally that's, yes, Native American housing funding. I can't remember the name. So groups like Cook Inlet Housing receive that funding. I don't know the details of that, but yeah, if you wouldn't mind following up. Yeah, and I know our local housing authority is Cook Inlet Housing Authority, so you may also want to contact the folks there. They might at least know kind of more information, and they could certainly tell you how they utilize that funding. But yeah, that's something we can certainly track, and I'll mention that to Mr. Constant as well. Other updates? I see Ms. Ross.
Yeah, I just wanted Jennifer Veneclassen from our office is on vacation today, so she couldn't give her update. But she's been doing a lot of work when you pass a resolution or have a stance on an issue to get that information to the legislature and our congressional delegation. And so there's been a few communications, I think, since we've last met to the some federal level people. One of them, which I can't speak to, I'm just reading the letter now really quickly. I'm not quite sure what it's about, but it was from members Constant, Volan, and Cross to Secretary Buttigieg on the STIP plan and kind of our Anchorage comments on that. And then they are also, this one I don't know as much about, but I think HUD rejected most of the grant applications from the Alaska Continuum of Care and the Anchorage Coalition in Homelessness. And so they're writing a letter and working with our congressional delegation to hold HUD's feet to the fire since they came and promised us money and then didn't even give the baseline this year. And then we did get notice, another issue you've been working on is the grocery store merger in front of the Trade Commission, and Representative Peltola's office gave an update on that, so that it's been delayed. And then also the Assembly, I think, passed a resolution and then worked with the congressional delegation to write a letter of support for the HUD grant, the PRO grant. So those are some of the things we've been communicating to the federal delegation. And then when Jennifer communicates them, she also CCs our federal lobbyists at Blank Rome so they can be aware of it too.
Yeah, thanks so much for that update. And yeah, I know we have plenty to do at the local level, but also there's so many things at the state and federal level that affect our city. And so, yeah, glad that we're continuing to do that. And just a general note to members too, if there's a bill that you would like to track or an issue like that, please do loop in legislative services staff, especially Jennifer, because we've been really trying to standardize the way that we track things and just having better record and communication of that. So super helpful. Okay, any other updates under federal, state, or just other member priorities? Okay, I'm not seeing any right now. So as I said, we are just going to use this committee generally for updates like this. So this is really helpful. But for those who are members or not, and you're watching this later, please feel free to come to this committee and share updates or bring something for discussion. It doesn't have to run through this committee necessarily, but we can be helpful for sure. And then I will also mention too, for all members, don't forget that you have the ability to use your platform and your letterhead. It doesn't have to always come from the full assembly. Certainly that carries more weight, right? But if there's something that you feel strongly about or that affects your district, that is something that we are able to do, is to advocate to other levels of government. So certainly want to empower folks to do that. And then I don't believe there's any other updates. I'll ask if there's audience participation. Not seeing anybody back there. No one on the phone. Okay. Well, in that case, I will, unless there's other items to bring up, I will go ahead and adjourn this meeting. So thank you, everyone.